Brandon Shields. Thank you for being here. Really?
Coming anyways.
Fresh. Richiso. I'm Richiso.
Mike
Fresh
Russo.
Bottom Reviews.
And Andy Shields. He'll be back later.
We forgot our sign. So, what we're going to be doing for this two panels, split between today and tomorrow. We're going to be talking nothing about collectibles, specific the big lines, starting with vintage, working our way up through Bandai, Marmots, Gigabrains, SH Monster Arts, and my favorite X Plus. So, we got a lot of information to put out, and I'm trying to get my PowerPoint working so we have something to visually look at when we're talking about this stuff. So that's really the purpose of what we're doing here. And we're going to start with vintage.
Yes, we are. Masters in '95 and '96, and then when Godzilla 2000 came out, I started buying the Japanese Bandai vinyls, and I've been going ever since.
Okay. I started collecting in the 80s, back when the most you could really get was the Imperials and whatever Japanese stuff you could find in a collectible store. And then I moved on to the Bandai's, Marmot, vintage toys, basically a little bit of everything.
I started around '94 with my brother, just going to conventions and stuff. When we got Trendmaster toys, kind of like everybody else. You know, Trendmasters rule, right? People here, how many people here collect Trendmasters?
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Like, you mean now or like past?
I mean, everyone who came around Toys R Us and bought Trendmasters toys.
I think everybody did.
Of course.
Yeah.
we all
No, you
did.
did. And then, you know, when you finally hit the jackpot around like '95, I think, for a lot of us to hit Bandai toys. After that, once you know you got G-Fan, and then made it finally here to this, and everything exploded. So that was mine.
I was buying Bandai's when nobody really knew about them. Basically, back when there were stores in California, around here in New York, New Jersey, where you can buy them really cheap, and nobody knew. And then all of a sudden, G-Fan comes along and G-Fest, and then the figures exploded. Like,
I live in Ohio, so I didn't have stuff like that.
I was used to paying like $15, and then all of a sudden you go to G-Fest, and the same Baragon I bought for $15 was going for like $300 and setting records every show.
Seems like if
right?
you're on the coast, you had, shops you could walk
Yeah.
to get that stuff. But you live, Midwestern like that, you don't have it, you can't get it.
At that point in time, the internet was.
There's
No
no
way.
Yeah.
There's no Facebook.
Tell me
The only
about
way to
it.
buy was to find them either at a convention or
You
at a
guys be
store.
lucky,
Or
lucky
a
enough to have
magazine.
Yep.
I've been collecting for about 20 years. Started off with Treadmasters, went to a comic book shop in late '94, and I saw my first Bandai figure, which was the 8-inch scale Bachelor Larva. And at that point in time, I realized, well, I'm going to start getting the good stuff, all the imported stuff from Japan. And this started my Bandai collection. And 20 years later, fresh vinyl for it. So,
I think Andy and I got lucky. Our first bond, that was a big scale 91 Godzilla. You can't really go wrong with that.
Hi everybody, my name's Andy Shields. That's my brother Brandon, of course. He had kind of went over my spiel already because being brothers, it was kind of fun to grow up and collect stuff. Like he said, we had Imperial Godzillas when we were little kids. Trendmasters came out, that was pretty darn exciting. I'll never forget finding the first the bendable Trendmasters King Ghidorah in a Kmart in Bucyrus, Ohio, which is that was a pretty monumentous occasion to find a Godzilla toy in a store in Podunk, Bucyrus, Ohio. And then, we found some conventions in Columbus and stuff, and it was great to take off from there. And like most of you probably have experienced, I'll never forget 1996, coming to my first G-Con at the time, G-Fest. And we watched a guy walk out of, we were trying to check into our hotel room. Our dad was checking us in. I was only 14. And this guy walks out with one of the large Great Monster Series 1964 Godzillas. My jaw dropped, my eyes bugged out, We had not seen something like that in person. It never happened for us. And as most of you realize, the internet was still young. So even finding websites about this stuff or seeing pictures of these things didn't happen that often. Getting to our first convention and getting to see that stuff in person, I imagine most of you have had a very similar experience to that. where it just, kind of clicks that you're in your own little version of heaven, and you you're gonna have fun if you got some money to spend. So I've been collecting since I was very young, seriously collecting since I was 14. Once we got to that first convention, it was game on from there. I've been collecting stuff ever since then.
Yeah, I think things really changed. Once you realized what you had G-Fan, and then you got to come to the convention. Then these guys actually, once the internet hit a little bit more, and we started having guys building websites. We still don't have Facebook groups or anything like that yet. But these guys that started
And some of those websites included Club Tokyo and Vinyl Madness, and Kaiju HQ had a toy section as well. And when I first started collecting, there was no Facebook, there was no social media. Those were the websites that I based my knowledge on. They had lists of the histories of the different lines and the different figures and photographs, and you could get an idea of what you're going into. And this is my 14th G-Fest. I started back in 2000. I was 12 years old, and just being surrounded by all these huge, collections of stuff for sale, and I've since become, close friends with a lot of guys that have, started off selling that stuff. But those were basically your three options for to have that knowledge, were Vinyl Madness, Club Tokyo, and Kaiju HQ. And Club Tokyo is still around. I believe Vinyl Madness will be closing within the next year. That's what the owner said. And I think Kaiju HQ has since come down. So.
And I don't
But
know
a
if
lot of these websites are being replaced by Facebook groups. I mean, we have how many members at this point?
Almost 3,000.
And we're just only one of the groups that are on Facebook. There are a whole bunch of other ones, and a lot of them, some of them are just for Ultraman, some of them are just for vinyls, but there's a dedicated X Plus group.
Club Tokyo has its own group.
Yeah, Club Tokyo does have its own group.
And I don't know if they mentioned this earlier, but we're not sitting up here trying to be experts necessarily or anything like that. Once we get the stuff rolling here, what we kind of wanted to do was to kind of show you guys a little bit of the history of the toy market. We are focusing on toys in particular. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. So yeah, we're not experts by any stretch of the imagination, but we've all been collecting long enough that we felt it'd be fun to do something for the convention. And obviously, we are all, the one thing that ties us together is we're all administrators for our Facebook group. So that's what kind of brought us together and gave us the idea to kind of come up here and talk to you guys about just some of the fun stuff that we've seen and done. And like I said, we'll hopefully go through a little bit of the history of some of the toys in a few minutes here.
Toy time, let's talk.
All right, vintage, right? Okay. Vintage, take it. It's your section.
Well, again, I know when I was collecting in the 80s, all I really had was the Imperial Godzillas. And I remember watching Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, Godzilla vs. Hedorah for the first time, and seeing Ken Yano go walking past with this big Godzilla. I had no idea. I thought maybe it was a prop or something. I didn't know it was a real toy. You could actually buy in Japan. And I think there might actually be a picture of it up there. Yeah. And he's sliding these toys down the slide, and I had no idea what they were. And it turns out, back in the 70s, these were toys that you could buy. And should I talk about how it all got started, or you guys want to do it? Or?
Pretty much, I mean,
The original film came out in 1954, but Godzilla toys didn't really come out until about 10 years later in the mid-60s.
Well, it started in...
Yeah, because the earliest toys were, actually the very first Godzilla toy period really was the Aurora kit. And so that was made in America, so basically Americans got the jump on the collectibles. The Japanese, throughout the 50s, they didn't really put much out, and the toy was a really big hit. And in Japan, they kind of took that design and they made basically was a company called Marasan, made basically a remote controlled model kit out of that design. And all those things go for incredible amount of money today. They're so unbelievably rare. Thousands, if you can find one, even a box, even
You
more
could
than that.
actually go, there is one in the dealer's room, and there is the box there with the original blue remote to it. A guy named Rob Trotch has one. You want to see one?
So you're looking for a toy, it's about this big, it's obviously made of metal, it's a Godzilla, and it'll have a remote
It's
come out
actually
back of
right
it.
across from my table.
And it'll,
See me in there in a dealer table?
so that's one of the oldest things you could purchase.
But the thing with the model kits, the electronic one, the RC ones, is that they were more expensive and they were harder for very young children to operate. And the plastic kits had to be put together with a lot of intricate, parts and stuff like that. So they took their model Godzilla and they just made it into vinyl. And that was the very first Godzilla vinyl figure back in '66. And that was designed so that much, much younger kids had something to play with that wouldn't break. And I know you look at those figures now and they look crude, they look, like I've heard people call them Happy Meal toys, stuff
Dog
like that.
shoe toy
Dog
gets
shoe
thrown
toy,
around a
tub
lot.
toys. But
Bath
this was the aesthetic that Ultraman toys, all toys kind of had that very cutesy aesthetic. If you look at the Marasan Baragon, it's smiling, its hands are up like this. It's cute. The Gorosaurus is cute, the Gabber is cute, but that was the design aesthetic. That's what they did back then. It wasn't until much, much later that they got more realistic with the toys. And
Well, truly marketed for kids.
they were kids' toys. They were like $3, $3.50 if you had kids' toys.
Yep.
And
I think we our first exposure to vintage was around 2004, I think, right?
that's when a lot of us really started buying them. I mean, they were something that I didn't know about as a kid. I mean, I know I'm a little bit older than some of the guys sitting here. It wasn't until like the early '90s, mid '90s, when they really started. All of a sudden, they were in magazines. There's Old Toy Museum. This book was published in Japan with all these big pictures of them. But us as kids, they weren't something we really could afford for quite a while.
No, you can afford them or get your hands on them.
Yeah, if you could find them.
Yeah.
So obviously, being the oldest stuff you can get, these are the most expensive items that you're going to be able to find. And it's kind of fun for most of us here. We went through a progression, at least a couple of us. We started with, again, Imperial and Trendmaster. Then, we'll talk about Bandai toys in a little bit. That was obviously the big step. I'm assuming a lot of you here, if you're at this convention, you probably think about either starting or have made that jump into something like Bandai toys. Then you get into some of the newer stuff that we'll talk about tomorrow, actually, that's a little more expensive. And then the top is this vintage stuff. And it's kind of fun to, as you get more serious into this collecting thing, to kind of put, challenge yourself. I always thought it was like a kind of a fun personal challenge. What can I get? I'm an adult now. I have a real job. I can actually buy things. My parents who are sitting over here real nice and bought me stuff in the past. But now I can buy my own stuff. I'm a real adult. So it's fun to see where you can go with this and just kind of take that step, as you go. And I would say, you should never like try to rush to it, but find people like us when you can, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you about that, because sometimes it can be hard to find good information about things, especially like vintage stuff. You don't want to rush into it, but it is fun. It's a real challenge. It's an actual treasure hunt to kind of find some of these
Only
things.
half of it is buying. The other half is actually learning the information about what you're buying.
And while stuff like
really, I mean, for me, almost that was more fun than anything, because
It was fun to
you
learn
can sit
about.
around like we're doing at the show here with a bunch of other guys, and you can just tell each other information.
And it's definitely true of the oldest toys, because some variants are impossible to find, so it's a learning process for all of us. There are some things I'm sure we don't even know yet about certain variants of toys, and unlike the Bandai, you learn about them and that's pretty much it. Vintage toys, some of them are so unbelievably rare, just color variants. I mean, someone one day might be feeling, let's spray it a different color, and there might be only a few hundred, if that, and it's something that we still talk about, because we're still finding out things that we didn't know. And I should have mentioned before, Marasan was one of the vintage companies. The other one was called Bullmark, who they bought Marasan out? How did that work?
Marasan had gone out of business, and
And-
Bullmark purchased their molds.
In fact,
and
that's
continued
Bullmark's
production.
logo right there on Andy's shirt.
And then here's the other thing with vintage. Me, I don't know jack about vintage. So I'm hoping to learn a couple things from these guys, because it is intriguing to me now, being that I've went through like the Imperial, the Treadmasters, up to the Bandai, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm acquiring a taste for these vintage figures. So the hard part is what is what do you like, what can you afford, and then it's find the right stuff, because there's a lot of reissues that come out over the
A
years
lot
that
of
I can look at a
companies,
Bullmark, oh, this looks like it's from, Hedora. I was like, oh no, that's from 2001, the reissue. It's not the actual vintage figure,
The
so.
vintage style is still very popular in Japan, and a lot of toy companies still make toys to look like those, the old toys, and some companies just outright reissue them. So there are toys that look identical to the original issues, and some of us, as just hardcore collectors, and some of us deal, it's, you might not even be able to tell the difference, and you have to know exactly how to tell the difference. I mean, there could be paint wear on something, or
A big risk with purchasing vintage toys is that none of them have been repaired or repainted over the years, and sometimes it can be very challenging to really understand, or
They've been
even
around,
when you're looking at it in
you got
person,
stuff that's been around since the 70s, so
to see what those differences are.
I mean, some of them have magic marker on the feet, little kids who wrote their names.
they literally have 4 at least class different sizes on vintage toys. You got giant, you got standard, you got medium, meaning you have small or mini, so it could almost be like 5.
There's a lot out
You
there.
know, and, like they're hard enough to get as it is, but like the small and minis, you know.
You can collect one line and then
And then when kids had those, you know, these are 60s, or well, most of the minis are from the 70s, but those were the first things to get thrown out. You know, they were at the bottom of the toy box, so they're the first ones to get dumped in the trash, and it was see buy. So, but I mean, you know, it's a whole different world when you're looking at, you know, the different sizes of them as well.
Set that down, Rich. Set that down. Yeah, I'll hold it.
And then they also, yeah, so there's, you know, like at least 4 different sizes, but then at one point in time, Bullmark also started distributing Bullmarks in Hawaii. And they had kind of crazy paint variants.
yeah, Hawaii,
well.
and I've heard some areas of the West Coast too, like San Francisco, like they did import them, but they would paint them completely differently. Like the Japanese, the regular standard Bullmark header is yellow.